In the following module, we will rig the mouth with a combination of joints and blend shapes. In this module, you will learn how the deformation of your mouth channels should look like and where you have to care for a proper combination of those channels. When you want to work with joints, where to place those joints best, how you can combine joint and blend shape deformation to use the best of both worlds. And there is, of course, even more pros and cons that will be revealed during this module. You almost have enough information to on your own decide whether you want to create your mouth rig with blend shapes or joints. While blend shapes, especially at the beginning, are a little bit easier to handle, joints, at least used for a basic deformation, lead in the end to a little bit better result. The reason for that is that blend shapes are not properly able to simulate rotational movement. Let's imagine you would, for example, have an eyelid, which is represented in this simple example by this sphere. And the goal is to just open it up. In this case, I rigged that sphere with a joint, and by the simple rotation of the joint, I can easily open the sphere up. And this is, of course, a perfect rotational behavior that we are having here in the deformation, and it works quite fine when we are using joints. Let's switch to the same object rigged not by joints, but by blend shapes. So I have a target for this object, which looks like this, which is the open state, and I want to generate this deformation in the animation by a blend shape. The problem is that blend shapes are always interpolated linearly in movement. So that means that when I have a look at the in-between states of the two extremes of the blend shapes, then the movement looks like this, where each point of the surface linearly moves to the target position. That is even more obvious if you have an eyeball inside. That would create a not so beautiful intersection in the in-between state. What we can use in case of blend shapes is that we are creating a so-called in-between target. That means we can go to a position where the blend shape is approximately to 50% activated, and then we are opening the shape editor. And we can say that we want at this position to generate an in-between blend shape. The moment it is generated, it is already set to the edit mode. So that means that I can now model on my object to create the shape that I want to have in this 50% activation of the blend shape. After that, it looks quite pleasing at the position where I created this in-between target, 0.458. But when I move it to the both extremes, then you can see that still the in-between between the extreme and the in-between is moving linearly, and also here I would have to create some in-between targets. So you can imagine that it is really way easier to create rotational deformation when you are using joints. Coming back to our face, then you can see that we have rotational movements, for example in the eyelids, the jaw, and the rolling out and in of the lips. With this information, we can now complete our pros and cons list. So on the pro side of the joints, we have a good looking rotational deformation always. And that of course leads to the downside of the blend shapes, because it is very complicated to generate rotational deformation with blend shapes, and it never looks as good as it is with joints. With this information, you now can finally decide which method you want to use for your mouth rig. That means that you have different possibilities to proceed with this module. When you decide to go for blend shapes, then you should skip directly to clip 8, where a possible UI layout will be presented, as well as how the controls should affect the deformation of the skin, meaning how the final channel deformation should look like. If you want to follow this module completely, then you will learn how to generate a mouth rig with using joints as base deformation and adding blend shapes on top to refine the shapes to make them look better and to help possible skinning flaws. You will then create a joint setup first, including the skinning, and then refine the deformation with corrective blend shapes on top.